quantum computers command exponentially scaling Hilbert space registers, while biological brains may also rely on quantum processes. But theoretical physics proposes a finite shadow bandwidth limit, a hard physical ceiling on quantum complexity. If consciousness is quantum, why doesn't the brain crash at this exact same limit? The confusion stems from a pervasive assumption across physics and neuroscience that if two systems operate on a shared quantum physical substrate, they must be performing the exact same type of physical operation. To resolve this tension, we must separate physical substrate from operational architecture. A superconducting qubit device and a human brain are both made of physical matter, strictly governed by the underlying rules of quantum mechanics, but they do not use that matter to achieve the same goal. Treating the biological mind as a version of a brute force machine is a category error. We cannot predict the limits of the brain by looking at the limits of a computer if the two systems are based on different architectural rules. The TCGS-SEQUENTION framework clarifies this distinction by redefining the observable universe. In this model, our three-dimensional reality is not the base layer of existence. It is a shadow manifold, denoted by the Greek letter sigma. This diagram illustrates the observable shadow and the actual territory, a timeless four-dimensional volume called counterspace. Physical systems do not generate reality from scratch. They project, or pull back, structural data from counterspace into the three-dimensional shadow. This mapping process is strictly limited. Projection bandwidth dictates exactly how much counterspace complexity the shadow can physically render at any single moment. Under this ontology, the mathematics of Hilbert space are not the territory itself. Hilbert space is an effective map used by observers inside the projection to calculate probabilities. Every physical system, whether a cryogenically cooled circuit or a human hippocampus, must obey the shadow's rendering limits. A system's survival depends entirely on how aggressively it demands this bandwidth. We can isolate where the quantum computing model differs from consciousness by breaking the term quantum into four distinct operational layers. The first layer is the quantum substrate. This is the baseline reality that all ordinary matter is described by quantum theory. A wooden chair is quantum at the substrate level, but this fact explains neither computing nor consciousness. The second layer is the quantum biological process. Here, specific biological systems exploit quantum effects in highly constrained ways, such as excitonic coherence, allowing plants to transfer energy during photosynthesis. Contrast that with the third layer, gate model computation. This is an engineered attempt to command algorithmic Hilbert space structures. The fourth layer is conscious projection architecture. This filter-stabilized system compresses selected source content into a unified, owned experience. Theory suggesting that human consciousness relies on microtubule coherence, like ORC-OR, place the brain in layer 2. Operating with quantum biological processes does not automatically upgrade a biological brain into a layer 3 machine. A microscopic protein utilizing quantum mechanics to fold efficiently is not attempting to factor semi-primes using Shor's algorithm. These systems place categorically different demands on the universe. Gate model quantum computers are specifically classified as shadow extraction architectures. This equation illustrates the mathematical bandwidth demand of a quantum machine, denoted as dq. The machine attempts to force a formal mathematical map into physical execution. The crucial parameter here is 2 to the power of n. For every logical qubit added, the formal state space expands exponentially, increasing the simultaneous structure required from the shadow. To execute an algorithm, the machine must keep all of these phase relations physically accessible, protecting arbitrary qubits from noise so they can be read out externally. This is a brute force demand for simultaneous, distributed access across an expanding map. That specific demand is what triggers projection bandwidth saturation. Quantum hardware fails at scale, not because nature rejects the laws of quantum mechanics. It fails because attempting to physically unroll an infinite map breaks the rendering capacity of the shadow layer. Biological consciousness operates in the opposite direction. It is a filter-stabilized projection architecture. This flowchart maps the sequential biological pathway required for consciousness, tracking how raw environmental data is transformed into an owned experience. The process begins with R sigma, representing raw neural registration. This is the massive, chaotic barrage of unconscious data the brain collects from the shadow. That data immediately hits K, the consciousness filter. This filter consists of semantic, affective, and bodily suppression structures. Instead of processing everything, the K filter actively destroys or ignores the vast majority of the incoming data. It only allows a highly compressed, carefully selected stream, labeled A sigma, to become accessible conscious content. The brain utilizes semantic compression to bind scattered data into coherent fields of relevance. This prevents a combinatorial explosion of sensory and quantum noise. Clinical evidence from anesthesia and spatial neglect confirms the sequence. The brain can continue vast neural registration without producing any conscious access for the individual. At no point does biological consciousness attempt to expose a complete Hilbert space amplitude table to the user. Consciousness survives the physics of the universe precisely because it restricts access to reality. It operates as a bandwidth-sparing corridor rather than an extraction engine. Bringing these two architectures together reveals why the initial paradox was logically flawed. The machine's demand, dq, scales exponentially. Biology's demand, dc, relies on compressive parameters, attention and memory. Therefore, dq does not equal dc. The expanding extraction shape crashes into the shadow bandwidth limit, while the compressed biological funnel operates safely below it. Expanding access to all possible states and restricting access to stabilized meaning are inverse physical operations. You cannot infer identical physical limits simply because two systems share a quantum substrate. Projection limits are dictated strictly by architectural demand. This architectural rule directly applies to the ongoing debate surrounding artificial intelligence and the pursuit of quantum machine sentience. Adding raw computational power, or thousands of logical qubits to an AI, expands its ability to manipulate mathematical maps. But computation alone does not inherently push a system towards subjective experience. Without a filter architecture, specifically embodiment and semantic compression, a system lacks the mechanism required to achieve owned, conscious access. Human cognitive constraints like fatigue, limited working memory, and attentional bottlenecks are not evolutionary flaws. They are functional necessities. If the brain lacked these filters and exposed the uncompressed counterspace, human experience would be abolished entirely, drowning the observer in unusable cognitive noise. Consciousness is powerful not because its computational capacity is infinite, but because it is constrained. The strict biological limits of the human mind are the exact physical architecture required to make meaning possible.